The Feast of the Epiphany is about light and darkness, grace and sin. It is an essential part of the Christmas season. The word here means the appearance or self-manifestation of God to the world in the sense that God reveals himself to the Gentiles. The emphasis on light and the star signify the revelation of divine truth about God and man's destiny, why he is here on this earth. The point is that Jesus is the King of the Jews, a descendant in the royal line of David, the Messiah, or the Anointed One, and the fulfillment of all the prophecies of the Old Testament, because he is both God and man. It is not the oracle in Isaiah that gives a rise to the story, as many see today, but it is the event that illustrates the words and the events of the Old Testament. We should remember that Matthew wrote his Gospel about 10 to 20 years after Jesus' death, so he knows Jesus Christ is God in the flesh. The three wise men from the east, from Arabia or Persia, have been given the names Gaspar, Balthazar, and Melchior. Matthew does not call them kings, but the gifts they give suggest that they might have been nobles of some kind. Having been led on by a mysterious star, they arrived in Jerusalem and asked the officials, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews, and where might he be found?" In ancient thinking, heavenly signs accompanied the birth of an important person. This was reported, for example, as having happened at the birth of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. King Herod was troubled because he was worried about a rival to his kingship. Matthew adds that all Jerusalem with him was also troubled, that is, the Jewish leaders. Perhaps they were upset because they did not know that Herod, a bloody and ruthless ruler, might do. Herod asked the chief priests and the scribes of the people where the Christ would be born. They say in Bethlehem of Judea, referring to a prophecy of Micah. That was the birthplace of King David, and the Messiah was to come from his line. Herod pretends to the Magi that he wants to go and pay homage to the new king. Here we see his cunning and deceit, and the Magi probably suspected the same thing. We know he was not sincere from subsequent events in the bloody slaughter of the holy innocents. A star or a bright heavenly light, like a star, led them to the cave where Jesus was born. It was probably a miraculous light, and because of this light, we now decorate our homes and trees with lights as a sign of the truth of Jesus Christ. When the Magi saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly. Joy is mentioned often in St. Luke's Gospel, but not only sparingly in Matthew. Here we see that God's revelation, his light, when humbly received, causes great joy in the human heart. Next, Matthew says that they worshipped him, or they gave him homage, as a very special person. Each of the three gifts presented has a definite signification. Gold was a sign of kings, so it means that the Christ child is a king. Incense was used for the worship of God, so it indicates that he is a priest. Myrrh was a spice used in burials. This is an omen of his death, since he will die like the prophets. Finally, they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, and so they left immediately for their own country. Here is an indication that God directs history. From the whole story, we see the different responses to the birth of the child on the part of Jewish leaders and the Gentiles. The Jews rejected Jesus, but the Gentiles accepted him and believed in him. We learn in today's epistle that the Epiphany illustrates the prophecies of the Old Testament. Matthew selects texts from the Old Testament that portray Jesus as the King of the Jews. "Be enlightened, O Jerusalem, for thy light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. The Gentiles shall walk in thy light, and the kings in the brightness of thy rising." This means that Christ is the light of nations, the lumen gentium. "All they from Sheba shall come, bearing gold and frankincense and showing forth praise to the Lord." The Gentiles coming to Jerusalem means that they are all called to join the church. We should remember that the Gospels recount historical events, but the primary interest is theological. So the story of the Epiphany is telling us that there were wise men from the East who came to pay homage to the baby Jesus. They represent all peoples and nations. We should remember that the Gospels recount historical events, but the primary interest is theological. So the story of the Epiphany is telling us that there were wise men from the East who came to pay homage to the baby Jesus. They represent all peoples and nations. We can detect three characteristics of the Magi. They were searchers. They followed the star looking for the truth. They were discoverers because they found what they were looking for in spite of all the difficulties. They persevered until they found what they were looking for, the King of the Jews. The wise men responded to the graces given to them and followed the mysterious light. Let us follow the light given to us, which means that we should be faithful to the graces given to us, and we should follow our own star. That star or light will lead us to the adoration of the child Jesus. Like the Magi, we should offer precious gifts, not gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which are consumed and pass away like all temporal things, but more excellent spiritual and lasting gifts of love, obedience, humility, and keeping the 10 Commandments. Accordingly, we can offer ourselves to Him at this Mass. Finally today, let us make our own communion antiphon of the Mass. We have seen His star in the east, and we have come with gifts to adore the Lord. May God bless you. Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus. Amen.